Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to have such a packed room. I know that's intimidating for Arthur, but I'm telling him that they're all here for him, as I'm sure you all will agree with me. As Millie said, I'm the chair, and I am an unabashed Kapuściński fan, as those of you who read my obit in The Guardian may recall. And we will be joined by the translator of Arthur's book a little bit later. She's valiantly coming all the way from Beijing, which I think is extremely impressive by her. And I'm very sorry to say that Neil Atchison, who would have been our the corrective to the Africanists here as an East European specialist, is unfortunately ill, so he's not here tonight. And I hope this will be a very inclusive evening. I'm sure there are lots of people with very strongly held views. So when we open it, it's not just questions. Your comments, your thoughts would be great. Before we start, I've got a couple of thank yous. I know there's somebody from English Pen here, at least one person, and it's a very big thank you to them, because English Pen supported the translation of Arthur's book in what's called their Writers in Translation program, which is now in its 7th year. I'm just going to read what I was told to say, in case I get it slightly wrong. The program aims to celebrate books of outstanding literary value, dedication to free speech, and intercultural understanding.
Oh, thank you very much.
If that's enough for you. And the second thank you is to the Polish Cultural Institute, who have supported Arthur coming on this a tour that he's now making.
And I would like to add my thank you to Verso and to Antonia Jones, who will join us very soon.
Yes, well, thank
for
you.
Wonderful work.
Thank you to the Frontline Club, and thank you to the Verso team. So, we've got this very glamorous title that I think is quite unhelpful. I like it. Where does journalism end and literature begin? Well, anybody who wants to talk about that is highly welcome to give us their views on that subject. But I think more interesting is we want to talk about Kapuściński, and we want to talk about Arthur's book. So there are those kind of three possibilities, and feel free to enter into the discussion with whichever bit of it you want to. So we'll start with Arthur will speak for about 5 minutes about his book, and then John Ryle, who I will introduce you to in a minute, will speak next. And if Antonia's arrived, she'll speak then. So Arthur, over to you.
Okay. In the very beginning, I would like to say why I wanted to write this book. I found, of course, I know Kapuściński, but I think it was, of course, not the only reason. I found his life and work very unique among the work of other journalists in my country. He was rightly chosen as a journalist of the 20th century, and in the world he was called frequently as a witness of the 20th century. He was born in 1930s in a poor city in Poland. He survived the Second World War, and he lived all the horrors that many people of his generation in this part of Europe lived. As a young man, he was a militant activist of the communist movement. And nowadays in Poland, it's the thing for which he was attacked and criticized, and he was to some extent after his death a victim of the right-wing witch hunt in my country. And in the book I try to explain and understand his political, ideological choices during that period. Besides that, he lived also the whole evolution and changes inside the People's Republic of Poland at that time. He was first he was a Stalinist communist, then he was revisionist, then he was he was very disappointed for the result of the system, and in the end, he finished in between the opposition and the old regime. As a writer and journalist, he was a witness of great events of the second part of the 20th century. He was a witness of the collapse of colonial powers in Africa, witness of revolutionary movements and military coups in Latin America, and in the end, the witness of the collapse of Soviet Union. And he has written a wonderful books about all of these events. I was also asking myself the question, why Kapuściński matters? What is the point? What are his main achievements? And I think there are 3 points. First is I think that he, as few, was able to make art of journalism. And there are a lot of examples. Even here I see the book Another Day of Life, which is about the end of colonial power in Angola. And in this book there's a wonderful description, I will not read it, of course, just to summarize. There's a wonderful description of the wooden city. It is the city packed in the crates, the things packed by the Portuguese living Angola. And once, after reading this book, Salman Rushdie said that there were many journalists there around, but only Kapuściński saw this wooden city living Angola. The second point is that probably as a few journalists he described wonderfully the mechanisms of the absolute or authoritarian power and mechanism of the revolutions. Of course, when you think what a journalist like him could add to all this big literature about absolute powers and revolutions, he did it in a very literary way, a very artistic way. To give an example, of course, I'm sure that many of you know the books of Kapuściński, but there are some. For example, in The Emperor, there's this wonderful description of the court officials who are competing between themselves about the favors, and they are looking the eyes of His Majesty in order to be noticed. And this description of the race of the faces toward His Majesty, it's I found brilliant way of the description, not on an analytical level, but on the artistic or literary level. The same is with the mechanism of revolutions. There were thousands of books written about it. But while Kapuściński observes the revolutions, the beginning and the end, he starts with the description of the man walking in front of the policeman or military, and this is this lonely man who is walking toward the policeman is the moment of the break of fear. And this is the moment when the really revolution starts. Of course, in the historical books, we may find a lot of descriptions, analytical descriptions about the reasons and backgrounds of the revolutions. But Kapuściński describes it at the level of like everyday events or life. And for example, the end of revolution he describes with the wonderful anecdote. In Tehran, when he goes to one of the committees and he observes a woman who came to get some papers or documents. And this is a wonderful description. The official at the revolution who's supposed to help the people, the revolution was in the name of the people, starts to look for a sheet of paper. There are a lot of sheets of papers on the table, but none of them is is right, so he disappears. A woman is waiting. He comes back with the piece of paper. Then, as Kapuściński described it, the most dramatic thing starts. He's starting to looking for a pencil. So in the end, he can't find a pencil. So Kapuściński borrows him a pencil or a pen. So the man signs the document, but then it turns out that probably the paper needs a signature of someone from the higher position. So the man disappears again. So through such a kind of descriptions, Kapuściński let us feel how to be on the court of the absolute power, or how is to be in the revolution inside of it. And the third point that I find very important is that Kapuściński is one of those journalists who was a voice of the voiceless. There's a huge background to maybe we'll have an opportunity to discuss during this evening, but I think he's on the side of the voiceless in a very particular way. It's not only on political or ideological level. He always looks for something that represents the everyday life of the excluded people. And there is one of these wonderful descriptions of the plastic container in which people can carry water, and how Kapuściński describes how this plastic container revolutionized life in some remote villages in Africa when she was. So, of course, the point one and point three, especially, the point one, the making art out of journalists, provoked much more after his death discussions about this borders between journalism and the literature. And the third point about partiality and impartiality of journalism. But I just want to open and give this remark, and maybe we'll have a chance to discuss these points later.
Thank you very much. Let's talk to John Ryle, or rather listen to John Ryle, who's a professor of anthropology and a very renowned expert on Sudan, the Horn of Africa in particular, and I'm sure many other things that I don't know so much about. And as I'm sure many of you know, has been a very acerbic critic of some of Kapuściński's work. So, John.
I just wrote one thing, Victoria, and it's
and it went everywhere.
It haunted me for years and years, and sort of comes back from the dead every so often. It's a revenant, but I'm not disowning it. Of course, I read Artur's book with enormous interest because it answered a lot of questions that I think had arisen in the mind of anybody who'd enjoyed or even not enjoyed Kapuściński's writing, because he was a bit enigmatic ever since he kind of suddenly appeared in the firmament of literature, and suddenly everybody was praising him and admiring him. And I think that happened with the Emperor, didn't it? That was his great entry into kind of Anglo-Saxon letters, if you like. And I was particularly struck by the honest way you deal with your own doubts and your own dilemmas about him, because you knew him and you admired him, but you found there were these dark areas of his life. The dark areas of his life are not something I'm competent to talk about. I think it's extremely interesting, and I think you made interesting analysis of the whole drama of life in Poland under communism and after. And of course, it was a very common story for people's files to reveal kind of things which might even be better never revealed. And it's, of course, as you said, a great pity that Neil Ashton is here, not just because he's an East European specialist, because he's also an Africanist, as indeed you are, of course. And I think Neil had a very extraordinary convergence of interests, which made him particularly concerned with Kapuściński, and he also, questioned, I think, his own presuppositions. I mean, I came to it, although I have been a journalist. I came to it as somebody interested in the subject of what Kapuściński was writing about, which means I'm not competent to talk about Shah of Shahs. I'm not competent to talk about Imperium, South America a little bit, but mainly the African stuff. And I think that perhaps in his reputation, because he came, as it were, to fame through writing about Africa, and indeed a lot of his writing was about Africa, but of course it wasn't his whole writing. He was very wide-ranging. But of course, when you know about a thing, you're liable to see the problems in it, and they become visible, and you kind of worry at them, because it was curious to me that this sudden burgeoning reputation, this very gripping book, because I mean, make no mistake about it. I mean, he was a great stylist. The Emperor is an incredibly gripping book, but if you are interested in the modern history of Ethiopia, there are very big questions about it as part of that history. And of course it is presented as a factual account of it. There's no indication in the text of the Emperor, or in its preface, or even on the cover, that this is to be read as an allegory of Poland under Gierek. I mean, this is the line that
everybody read it this way in 1970s. Yes,
in Poland they did. Yeah. But I think I have to put it to you, well, not you personally, but I mean, if somebody wrote a piece of reportage about the life in the Politburo under Gierek, which was based on dubious testimony by unnamed people, which people questioned the existence of, and then when it was questioned, people say, well, hang on, those official party officials didn't exist. He put words into their mouth. If, say, an Ethiopian writer come to Poland and done this, and then they say, oh, it doesn't matter, it was one allegory of Ethiopia, would that have been acceptable?
Well, I think the answer is not very easy. I think that to understand why Kapuściński wrote it this way, I will give you a little bit of background, just 1 or 2 minutes. In the late 1950s and the early 1960s in Poland, there was born something that we call Polish School of Reportage. I'm really not sure if it deserves this name, but okay, in Poland we talk about Polish School of Reportage. Under censorship, it was impossible to criticize the regime in opinion articles. So the reportage became an instrument, a tool of description of the darker sides of reality in Poland under communism. And it happened that the reporters who went in some remote city or village and were describing life there, they not only changed the names of the characters of the people, but they sometimes, in order to cover them and not to compromise them, not to expose them on repression or some problems, they created fiction person made of 2 or 3 real. Of course, you can say from the perspective of the free world, it's absolutely unacceptable in journalism. But this is the context, how this school of writing was born. And when Kapuściński was writing the Emperor, I really, he gave a lot of interviews later, and I really not sure what he had in mind. I know one thing, that first, probably the officials of the court of Haile Selassie, they didn't speak Baroque-like language. It's obvious. And someone who knows very well Polish literature can notice, hi, this is Antonia. So can notice very easily some literary allusions to great Polish novels or poetry or so. But surprisingly, some people, even in Poland, read it as a non-fiction, and at the same time, not sometimes the same person, read this book as a metaphor or allegory of the court of the Communist Party in 1970s. So, what's the conclusion? One of the Kapuściński's friends said, and I quote him in a book, that The Emperor is the best Polish novel of the 20th century. And I think that Kapuściński wouldn't mind. I think Kapuściński wouldn't mind. But I have a question to you, and maybe you can answer with me. When The Emperor was published in 1980s in the United States and then arrived to UK, and Kapuściński, for some reviewers, was compared to Kafka, Hemingway, and some other big names. But for some reviewers wrote about him as a witness of the 20th century and praised the book. And so, how did British or American reviewers could think that this is non-fiction? I mean, did they really think that that the officials at the court of Haile Selassie spoke poetic language, Baroque-like language? I think that if Kapuściński notified the readers in 1970s, hello, this is allegory, no way to be, for coming out. I mean, the book wouldn't have been published. So I think to some extent Kapuściński found, and his books, they were found in this situation, somehow in a trap. I mean, when he became famous, he was prized in Britain, France, Spain, United States. And people called them journalists, reporter. So maybe he might thought, but maybe it is right. Maybe literary reportage is also this. I mean, I can change details. I can create fictional characters out of 2 or 3 real persons. Even in late 1970s, before and after he wrote The Emperor, in some interviews, we can find his doubts about it. There's an interview I quote in the book between him and another great reporter. And he asks him, Richard, do you think that we can change some details in the reportage? And he say, no, we can't invent anything. But we can sometimes amplify some details in order to get better literary effects. So you have to also have in mind, I think, that in Poland under dictatorship, we didn't have like open discussions about new journalism or about borders between literature and journalism. What is journalism? What is allegory? And we didn't have discussions about the conflict of interest. This has linked with his occasional collaboration with Secret Service when he was traveled as a correspondent. So I think I was somehow angry. Not now. I'm very impressed by the reception of the book right now. But after the uproar in Poland, when I read some headlines in the international press, great reporter accused of lying and spying. So I thought, oh gosh, I preferred not to write this book. I didn't want to do this. I wanted to understand Kapuściński, of course, also with the darker sides of his life. But it was, okay, this is another topic John asked me about, and sorry for digressions.
No, it's an interesting digression. But before we come to Antonia, as we've got so far into the Ethiopian corner, as we might say, as we have a distinguished Ethiopian journalist here, do you want to say anything?
Not really. I mean,
Come on, Mesven. You're his only defender in Ethiopia.
it's not defending him.
Have we got a mic?
I always thought his books were not literally journalism. I mean, I think most people would think that. But then he was a political man. So why didn't he write a book on Mengistu, for instance? So there was, I think, an agenda in his mind, which is fine.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can you hold the mic closer to your mouth?
Right.
It's not on. It doesn't.
Okay. Is that better?
Closer.
Okay. Everybody, I think, at least in Ethiopia, when I was there, if he was coming from Poland, they obviously knew he must have contacts with the authorities there, etc. So that's not big news. But in the end, I think his books are welcome, and I enjoy his books. I like his books, and I think they're being. I would still defend them in terms of, you know. The only bit I wouldn't defend was that censorship in the Shah of Iran.
Yeah.
The bit about the CIA plot, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a little bit funny,
Yeah,
but other than that, you know.
There were lots of, your book was so interesting. I mean, all that kind of thing, very interesting.
Are people familiar with the little bit of the censorship of the Shah and the Shah of Shahs? No? Would you want to say it, John?
Oh, Artur should say it. He knows it.
Yeah, talk about just the 15 pages, just very briefly.
Okay, so the story is following. There are some around 15 pages at the Shah of Shah that disappeared from the American edition of the book. And I was trying to get to know how it happened. And you can read in details at my book, but at the end, it seems that Kapuściński himself censored it. And I don't have 100% answer why he did so. My hypothesis is that that he was afraid of being attacked as a communist correspondent. This 15 pages, I forgot to mention that they tell the story about the CIA involvement in the overthrowing Mossadegh in 1953, and about links between the U.S. and Reza Pahlavi during the dictatorship of Shah, and that's it. So I also asked the editor of that book at the American publisher. So I get an answer that we didn't ask him to do that, and it is possible that Kapuściński was thinking in a very Polish way. I mean that he was living under dictatorship, under censorship, so he might have imagined a lot of things that might happen. So he censored it. And I also talked to one of his translators who confirmed that he was very, uncomfortable when she asked him about it. So it was him who did that.
You said later in the book that you thought perhaps he was concerned, but his own
Past.
collaboration might eventually come out, and that could make him look very bad in Western eyes if he'd criticised the CIA and written about he himself was working for the UP. Because
as you know from the headlines, or maybe from my book, there was an episode in the Kapuściński's life when he, to some extent, occasionally and very little, but collaborated with the Secret Service when he was a correspondent. He was asked to write reports. Usually he said, sorry, I don't have time. And with his position inside the Polish establishment at that time, he could do that. Just leave me alone. But from time to time, he wrote some short information. Sometimes it was something about death squads in Central America, and sometimes it was the analysis about the Mexican regime in 1970s. And these texts were basically analytical and could have been published as his text written for the Polish press agency. He was a correspondent of the Polish press agency. But there are 2 free notes at the archive when he has written some description of some person. So there was this one American-Mexican journalist who probably was the CIA agent, and Kapuściński describes him, and there was another 2 cases. But in fact, I have to say that this file in archive is basically rubbish, and Kapuściński didn't do harm to anybody. So it was. I take it as a. Of course, in my book I write directly that I think that he crossed the line that journalists shouldn't do. But let's come back to the circumstances in which Kapuściński lived. We didn't have, in fact, in communist Poland, discussions about conflict of interest. So, and you have to also know that in the ideology of the state of that time, the journalist is supposed to be a soldier on the ideological front line. So Kapuściński, at least until a certain moment, considered himself as a soldier on the ideological front line.
Before we take up some of those very interesting points, and I'm sure that a lot of people would like to comment, I would just like to ask Antonio, do you want to just talk a little bit about what it was like doing this work and why you decided to do it? Antonio is a very much decorated translator from Polish, and this was a very huge project to take on. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yes, I could say something about that. Well, I read the book before it was published, and there was already a fuss starting in Poland about it. And I was reading it on behalf of the Polish publisher in order to help try and find an English language publisher for it. And so I was also in parallel reading all the things that were coming out in the Polish press, the whole argument against the book and for the book. And so I ended up writing quite a detailed summary at high speed and kind of sending this around and translating some pieces of the book. And I was thinking all the time, do I want to translate this book? Is this a good idea? Is this something I want to do? And I found the book very interesting. And to me, the facts of Kapuściński's biography don't detract from him as a writer. And the book simply made me want to read his books again. And it was a wonderful excuse to read his work again. But I did have to think, because I have one foot in Poland all the time, and I do know people who were deeply offended by this book and who I work with on a frequent basis. And I did have to think about my own Polish involvement. But I decided that I was getting carried away by a very typically Polish argument. And Poland's a society where things are completely, well, polarized. It really is. Either you're with us or you're with them, and there's nothing in the middle. So I thought, well, I always get annoyed by how extreme that can be. And I always take advantage of the fact that I'm a foreigner and I can step back. So I thought, well, I must purely look at this book from my own British or Western, non-Polish perspective. And of course, it's a first for Poland to have a book about someone who they think of as a great hero that isn't just a sort of PhD thesis or just a sort of hagiography, but actually in a much more in the style of a Western biography and the kind of thing we're much more used to than any Polish readers are, that actually analyses how somebody worked and what influences caused them to take certain decisions in their career. And that's fascinating. The other thing in the book that I felt was a first and that made it extremely worth doing is that it's the first time I've actually read a detailed description of how somebody, anybody, not just a writer, made a career in communist Poland from immediately after the war onwards. How did you become successful? What did you have to live with? And I found that something I'd always wondered about, but I'd only ever read about people not being able to do things, not about how people did things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In the controversy in Poland, was it entirely a political controversy, or what about the controversy about his wife not wanting the book? Was this something that you found difficult?
Well, yes, because I had met Kapuściński and liked him and have friends who were his friends and had met him socially rather than through work. And I know his publisher very well, who had originally commissioned the book. And I've never really had that conversation straight out with him. But there's one thing in the book which I personally actually am not wild about. Artur knows this.
I know this.
But I don't like the chapter about the Kapuściński's daughter. I feel that would be better left out, because I don't think that, personally, I find that a little bit below the belt. But you have your reasons and it's your book, but it's not my decision.
Yeah.
But you asked my feelings. So.
I do think the issue of privacy and all of that is quite an issue. When you do this kind of book, it's a choice to do it or not do it.
Well,
Kapuściński wasn't worried about that when he wrote The Emperor, was he?
Anyway, I just raised it.
Good point. Thanks, John. No, of course, I felt some conflict of conscience, loyalties, and I must say, Antonia may not agree, but I tried to do it in the softest possible way. And there was, if I decided to do that, there was no way to make it softer. And I thought that to describe personality of Kapuściński and to live his private life outside, I think I thought it would be a big distortion of the whole picture. Kapuściński as a person was a big seducer. So, as some of my interviewees said, he seduced men, women, children, everybody. I mean, readers. I mean, in this way, he was a very seductive person. He was also someone who lived a long time far from home. So I was asking myself, is there any price that one and his family pay for such a kind of life he has chosen? And and there were more arguments. I think his poetry. He wrote poems about love, women when he was 15, 16, when he was 50, 60. So I was asking myself also about the roots of in real life of this interest in such a kind of poetry, and so in the end I arrived to the conclusion that I can't leave his private life out of the picture. And also of course in Poland we don't do it, or it only about someone who died centuries ago. But when I read some books published in the West, I saw that the private life is like a legitimate area of journalistic or writer's investigation or interest. So.
Okay, let's not get too far down that particular road. Interesting though it is. Maybe other people want to.
I didn't understand. What was the point?
We appreciate what you're saying.
Okay, thanks.
Told you they'd be on your side.
Some agents there.
I'm sure there are lots of people who have questions to ask of Arthur or points they want to make about Kapuściński's work. So could I just see a few hands so I get a bit of an indication of yes, okay, I can see it, there's lots. Can I ask you, when you make your point or ask your question, can you say who you are, first of all?
My name is Lucy Parker. I have started reading the book this morning, so I'm 6 chapters in.
Hang on a second. Are you hearing at the back?
Yes. And my question is, I was intrigued by your first few pages about the smiles. Could you tell us a little bit about the challenge, what it felt like writing this biography and at times not finding content, not finding enough, you say information, it's like you would talk to his friends and at the end of the conversation you would sort of know less or get the impression that they'd known him decades but didn't really know what to say. Can you talk a bit about that struggle to maybe find things to write about?
Well,
hang on a second. I think we'll take a couple of questions together, because otherwise we may still be here long after the door is closed. So let's take this one as well.
Hi, my name is also Antonia. Hi. So I just I'm a journalist myself, and I wanted to talk about Kapuściński as a journalist. And I know there's this term of magical journalism or something like that, which he has been compared to. But the difference between his books and his the filing of stories, which he filed on a daily or weekly basis from the various places where he was based, in terms of the style of writing, the content, and the censorship that he might have probably did endure from the communist government in Poland at the time.
Let's take a third one. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Magda Walter, and I'm Polish, but I'm a journalist, but I was never a journalist in Poland, except maybe for a year or so before I left. My question is very specific. I haven't read your book. I've read a lot of the discussion of it in the Polish press, and I have a very specific question about the files that you used, about his cooperation with the special services, and whether you had certainty that the files were legitimate and credible. Because I know from my own family, one of my relatives, my brother, was listed as a collaborator and challenged the files because they were completely false. It was a Secret Service informant who made up his story, basically. So I was just wondering whether the veracity of my brother challenged them in court during the lustration process and won. So that's just something that I'd be curious to know, whether those files were 100% credible.
Okay.
So
you could just comment on all of them.
Well, the first question was about the smile and the fact that when I started the interviews about Kapuściński, some people who knew him for decades really didn't know anything. So it gave me a sense that he's even more cryptic, more enigmatic person that I thought. I knew he was, but of course, and I had a feeling it would be very difficult to write a story. But fortunately, over the next conversation, obviously, as you can read, even if this first 6 chapters, some people started to talk, and it turned out that some people know a lot and remember a lot. So it was, in the beginning, it was the feeling that maybe I will not write this book because I will not have sources. And to write a book based on the documents would be, it's a kind of boring. It's something I wouldn't be interested in. I'm not sure if I understood well your question, but you asked about the stuff he wrote for the Polish Space Agency, not for his books, and for rather
and the difference between
and the
that,
difference.
because I think a lot
Yeah.
of the argument that we've seen tonight is an
Yeah.
accusation because through his
Yeah.
stylization
Yeah.
of certain events which he's
Yeah.
because of his stylization of certain events
Yeah.
which you saw and the portrayal in the books
Yeah.
is sort of a criticism of him as a journalist. However, we haven't really discussed his reporting and filing of his stories, which is a distinction that I think we should make.
He when Kapuściński was working for the Polish press agency, he was I would say a sort of a normal correspondent. He wrote in a probably typical style of that time. I mean, of course, what, who, where, when, but there was something else in his text which reflects the circumstances. As I said before, under the old system, the journalists, there were only journalists approved by the official factors. So especially someone who worked for the Polish press agency abroad, he was supposed to be a soldier on the ideological front line. So when you read some of his news stories, sometimes there's not a lot of this ideological stuff like ideological adjectives or some construction of the story. That, for example, when he was writing about MPLA in Angola, he was writing as really as a soldier. That there were we and there were them. So you can feel that. But I'm not Africanist, but I think that I know much more about Latin America. So when I was reading his texts from Latin America, I have to say that they were on the level, on the information, they were excellent. They were, I mean, or okay. I mean, I didn't find any literary, crossing of the border between journalism and literature. When he started to write the books, it changed. But this about this archive and his collaboration with. Yes, you are right. A short introduction. In Poland there's an institute called Institute of a National Remembrance, which is really unbelievable name, because this basically it is archive of the secret police that spied on people. So when you give this is very ideological name given to this institute by the right-wing parties, and to call these secret police files National Remembrance Institutes, it's some ridiculous thing. So your doubt is very legitimate about if the papers there we can rely on it or not. So there was a big problem first among historians in Poland. To what extent they should look into these papers or not. So in the end, of course, in the beginning there were only like right-wing oriented journalists and historians looking to these papers. But in the end, I mean, the other historians that I could call them reasonable, and they started also to look into these files very carefully. I mean, really looking into it, you have to be really careful before you write anything. So I was looking also in the other sources to what extent and if Kapuściński really had anything to do with the intelligence. I'm not saying secret police in Poland, because he has never done anything. But when he traveled as correspondent, yes, he did. And I found the other sources. I also remember some conversation with him. He was not very eager to talk about it, but from the conversations with him, I knew something. I mean, it was nothing very concrete, but for example, he told me that I knew this man and that man very well. And I knew who, and for example, someone was the chief of the Polish intelligence, like in Mexico. And of course, I talked also to one of the officers. It was very short telephone conversation because he didn't want to talk too much, but he told me something, and it is in the book. And there is also someone I called in the book interpreter, and there's someone I knew long before the work, before I started to work on the book. So I had the reasons to trust in what he was talking, in what he was saying. He didn't do it in order to compromise Kapuściński, rather to explain the context. And he himself confirmed that what Kapuściński did for the intelligence was basically rubbish. I mean, he didn't do harm to anybody. Although I also mentioned that to some extent I trust this interpreter, but I have to assume that maybe he's not saying everything. I mean, and in the end, the most important conclusion, especially in the Polish debates, is that looking into the archive, I end with the completely opposite conclusions to the conclusions of these right-wing historians and people who are organizing witch hunts, especially in 1990s and later also. So I finished with the conclusion that, I mean, the main narrative in Poland is that the people who collaborated with the intelligence or secret police, they sold their soul to devil, and so my conclusion is that there was no devil. I mean, especially for Kapuściński. Someone can not agree with him, of course. He not agree with his choices, political choices at that time. But you can't call him someone who made harm to someone. You can't call him cynic. He was a true believer, like many people of his generation. And I think the role of the author of biography, like a biography of him or any other big name like Miłosz or Kołakowski, who were also part of Polish establishment in 1950s, and some of them later too, is first of all to understand the circumstances and how the world was like at that time.
Thank you. I saw there were two at the back, and then there was another one a little way down there. Let's start with the two at the back.
Joanna Zgadza. I'm Polish. I write the book in Polish. Just want to thank you for writing about Kapuściński. I just want to thank you about writing about Kapuściński as a human being. The thing that you mentioned earlier and what Antonia said about his wife. This is what I would like to ask about you as a writer, because his wife tried to suppress the publication of the book because of the certain private elements that included. And I was wondering, how did you feel? Did you ever consider when she was trying to make the case that she's going to be successful, and what were your emotions? I mean, after finishing such a huge book, that he might not be published because his wife will stop it from publication. That's my question.
Well, it was, of course, it was a difficult moment when because I knew about it, I think from the press, I don't remember, yes, that there is a case in court in order to stop publication. There's a long story. I think we don't have time to enter in this relations between me and her during the work over this this book. And in fact, I have to mention and correct a little bit, because usually people think that this is the only issue that she was against, that I touched the private life of his. In fact, I have two cases in tribunal. Now I'm sued by her and by Kapuściński's daughter, and both cases are not finished yet, and probably far from being finished. And
what are they suing you for?
For defamation.
Defamation.
Yes, and there are some other very juridical accusations that I don't even know how to translate it very well into English. That I touched some goods of theirs. I mean, writing this book. But when I read the charges against me, that there are like, for example, in one of these cases there are like over 40, and only one or two are about private life, and there are some things, some charges like there's quotation about someone else critical opinion about Kapuściński, and there is a commentary of the defense lawyer who represent them that this opinion is offense. I mean, so in fact, I couldn't have written anything. So I really don't know if I think this is not what I know, but I think that even if I left out the private life, equally I would have been sued. Yeah, because it's everything. That, for example, the fact that Kapuściński knew someone who was his protector at the central committee of the party. So supposedly this is a defamation. So I'm sorry. So
please.
Magda Raczyńska, Polish Cultural Institute in London. I remember reading this book in Polish first. I'm really sorry, Antonia. I've never read the English version, but I read the Polish one fully, and I remember being surprised by the private parts, and I didn't like them then. I was living in Poland back then, when the book was published. But then I came here, and I've been living here for the few years, and suddenly I realized that journalism in this country is not that neutral as it tries to be, and suddenly Kapuściński could be, for example, one of the greatest twips on Twitter. He would have loads of followers, really. But I didn't want, this is just a comment. I wanted to ask you, Artur, because you are also I'm from this generation who was sort of brought up on your text about South America, and left movements and lots of kind of protests, indigenous protests there. And you were the only voice in Poland for many years to write about it, even before all the kind of other institutions started operating. Yes, of course. But I remember really being educated on your text. And what do you think, as a journalist, about this division, between literature and journalism? Because I remember reading your text and being absolutely fascinated by the emotion you were able to convey. And for me, it was much more important than just pure facts. And obviously, facts have to be checked at some point.
You can do it. I'm not against it.
But that's my question. What was your personal attitude to this literature, journalism, fiction, fact relationship in Kapuściński's and yours work?
Well, I think that one of the lessons from this work, and I think that like instinctively I felt it before, but I think that if you do journalism, I think you can write things, not only the facts, but things that like capture the spirit of the moment. But you have to use the real ingredients. I think you just can't make things up, and I think sometimes the border in some aspects are very clear, and in sometimes it's not very clear. When it comes to this very subjective emotion or point of view, sometimes someone can say, okay, you wrote there was hot there and I was there and I felt not so hot. I mean, but this is I mean, on the level of being subjective or objective. There are some descriptions, like in Kapuściński's book, that are very poetic. And they are literature, but at the same time they're journalism. Like the example I gave in the beginning, when Kapuściński described in the book Another Day of Life about Angola, this wooden city, this all the stuff of the Portuguese packed into these big crates. And in certain moment I was asking myself, wow. is because there's another description, wonderful in this book, that is poetic, and I think it's fiction. It's about the dogs. There's his description of the multitude of dogs, and Kapuściński is describing, is imagining where these dogs are going to wander. To one of them, to Congo, and some to south, north, and obviously it is not work of journalists; it's rather work of artists. But this wooden city is literature and journalism at the same time, because I saw the pictures Kapuściński took of these crates, and there are a lot of them, and I think that the description is even better than the photos. But I can confirm that it was real. I mean, he didn't invent this picture of the wooden city. So you can see that sometimes journalists can be literature, and sometimes when it crosses this border, I think it's okay, but it's better to say it to the reader. It's. I think it's a part of the pact between the writer and reader.
Absolutely. And can we also remember that there are great journalists who didn't make things up? There are great journalists who don't make things up. They actually obey the rules. They don't break the rules, and yet they're just as great writers. Would you agree?
Sometimes, yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean,
a
great journalist. You want an example of a great journalist?
Yeah, I mean, just who are you thinking of?
Who am I thinking of at the moment? Well, and also there are also great writers who don't
I can tell you a few names. So I think that one of the greatest journalists is John Lee Anderson.
I was just thinking of him.
Yes,
I was absolutely thinking of the other day. Exactly.
Yes, or Mark Danner.
I know he doesn't make things up because the New Yorker constantly ringing me up to fact check him.
Yeah.
And there are people called fact checkers, and they don't have them here because, of course, British journalism is a bit odd. But in America, no self-respecting publication is without a fact checker. The fact checker rings you up and says, you've written that the battlements of the castle were purple at sunset. Are you sure they were purple? And you say, well, it depends on the time of day. You said sunset, not sunrise. Are they purple or were they pink? They ring up your informant and they say, Mr. Wilde has written this piece describing you as obese and offensive. Are you indeed obese and offensive? Oh, my goodness. And they ring you up and you say, you said half a dozen. Did you mean 6? And you said, well, it might have been 8, it might have been 4. And so they ring somebody else. I mean, there is a culture of intense dedication to facticity. These are the rules of journalism. If you break these rules, you have to say so. If you don't say so, you risk people like me, nitpickers, coming along and saying, look, you're misrepresenting it. And there's a contract with the reader, there's also a contract with the subject. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very, very important, particularly because Kapuściński was often writing about these voiceless people, right? Well, so he invented the voice, right? That's okay. He invented people, you documented it yourself. He invented people, he invented dialogue. He said he was in places he wasn't. Do these things really not matter? I think they matter.
Yes, but I think Kapuściński, I think that we have to be careful about it, because we had a few examples of journalists who wrote the story and they were not there. There were a lot of scandals, like someone was taken away the Pulitzer Prize, or there was someone recently, a few years ago, in the New York Times who made things, who never.
She invented a drug addict and they took a Pulitzer Prize.
But this is not the case of Kapuściński. When he wrote a book about Angola, he was there. He wrote books about football war, and there's stories from different countries, Ghana, Congo, and he was there. So I think we have to be careful.
Not only was he there, but as he tells us himself, he went through roadblocks that no white man had been through before.
Well,
how do we know, by the way? How did he know?
I would like to say something on this subject. The reason I brought this book with me, Another Day of Life, because I wanted to tell you a little story about how I met Kapuściński. I was working in Angola a lot, and I wrote a rave review of this book by a Portuguese south of nowhere, which some people may have read. And I got a fan letter from Kapuściński. And of course, I was very excited. And we met. And he was obviously still interested in Angola. And we began to talk about this book. And this one. Yeah. And I have a lot of friends in Angola who were with him in many of the incidents that he describes about these roadblocks. And I think that part of what gets lost in this kind of discussion is how much people in, I don't know about Latin America because I don't work there, but how much people in Angola at any rate lived with him, really enjoyed him, and found the book told the story that they wanted told. And you said there were lots of journalists there at the time. Actually, there weren't. There were, at the time when he wrote this, there were very, very few.
But there were some. There were some.
Yeah, there were some, but very few. And so people that I know feel that he did something for them with this particular book. That's why I didn't want to go too far down the old emperor road, because I think a lot of his books come at different times and he did them in a different way. So I agree with Arthur to John. You have to be careful. The specifics of what you wrote about the emperor is one thing. And the specifics of what my Angolan friends feel about this book and what I'm told in Latin America people feel about what he wrote about Latin America, they love him because he did something that was true for them. And, you know, we are, on the whole, Westerners, outsiders. And that's why I'm so happy there are so many Polish people here, as we haven't got Neil. I can't begin to judge how people in Poland feel about what he wrote about Eastern Europe. And it would be lovely if
I can say a word that is... okay? Okay, sorry.
No.
So, the floor is yours, sorry.
But maybe some of you want to say something about that. You agree with Arthur's characterization of that period, or you... Hang on, there's a mic coming your way.
Okay. Thank you, my name's Barnaby. I'm a journalist. I'm also interested in Angola. I just reread Another Day of Life, and I'm curious, was he a great linguist? Specifically, did he speak Portuguese?
Yes. Kapuściński spoke, he at that time he was quite fluent. He spoke probably much better Russian or French, but he spoke Portuguese, and he spoke Brazilian Portuguese. He learned Portuguese in 1968 when he was like for around 6 months or a little bit more in Brazil as a correspondent. So he definitely spoke Portuguese.
I'll give you another go in a minute, but let's take people who haven't had a go, please.
Hello, my name is Steve Crawshaw. Responding partly to your question about how Kapuściński was perceived, I was living in Poland in the late 70s and early 80s, and that was the first time I read Kapuściński, including what he wrote about Solidarity, the trade union that grew up and in a sense changed Eastern Europe, and then got to know him later and was interested, but staying with the 70s and 80s, I'm interested to hear from Artur your take. There was a film which some may have seen by the Polish film director Andrzej Wajda, which in Polish is called Without Anesthetic, and the English version was called Rough Treatment. Yeah. And I think it's generally accepted that that was, in a sense, an indirect portrait of Kapuściński, but also of Polish society. So it goes what you described as somebody who lived a little bit on the edge, was kind of having to work with the establishment, and through that working of the establishment was able to say things. And that was something which clearly Poles were very, very conscious of in their daily lives in those days, of how to move around. Another film made by Zanussi at the same time was called Camouflage Colours, of how to survive within a society and push as far as you could go. So I'm interested, in a sense it picks up on what you said earlier, but that film that you will certainly know, and you probably discuss it in the book, how you see that and how that fits into Polish society, the person living on both sides of the line at the same time.
Let's Before Arthur responds to that, were you putting your hand up? No. Oh, okay. I'd also just like to perhaps bring Antonia in on this a bit, because, as you say, you stand on both
a little bit
sides. If you had anything you wanted to add on this.
Through the cloud of jet lag, which is closing in on me as it's 4 a.m. from my point of view.
Have some more water.
We fetch her a black coffee.
I don't really have anything to add to
that. Okay. Why did you respond to what he said?
I'm not sure if I get all the details. But this, it is, in my opinion, Kapuściński is not the character of that film. I mean, it is. As much as I know, he liked to think that he was, but he wasn't. I mean, superficially he was, because there's the character. The main character of this movie is a journalist, a foreign correspondent. Even in some of these dialogues on the film, he repeats some phrases of Kapuściński spoken in some interviews. But in the end, this journalist, who is a part of establishment, who is awarded journalism, prized by the regime, for some reason he loses. He loses his position with, like, step by step, and we can observe, like, by small details. For example, he enters his office, and he usually found all international magazines on his desk, and then this magazines disappeared, and he's, like, told something like, I don't remember exactly, but it's told that they reduced the number or something. But he was feeling something wrong happened. Then there's a discussion inside the office, and usually his opinions were listened. And then people start to listen to some young guy who was trying to make a career. So, but on this level, but Kapuściński was not the case. I mean, he until the solidarity, even after solidarity movement was born, Kapuściński was in between the solidarity. He was sympathizer of solidarity, but in a very particular way. He was not anti-communist. He was rather against the mistakes of the system, but not against not for the change of it. And he was a part of the movement inside the Communist Party, reformist movement. That try to link the solidarity and the party. He quit the party after 1981, when General Jaruzelski took over and destroyed solidarity. But at that time he was not. And in the end, in the movie, the character, we don't know if he committed suicide or if he was. Or was he killed by someone? And in fact, the figure in real life was not Kapuściński, but was much more Henryk Holland, who was a journalist and writer, and he was, like, bullied by people from the party, by secret police, and so, and he finished like that. When someone is going to watch this movie and will recognize some details in real Kapuściński, so be careful, because when he was a part of the establishment, he didn't have such a kind of problems like this character. Even after Kapuściński left the Communist Party in 1980s, he was offered. He rejected then. He already had contacts with the opposition, democratic opposition, but he was offered. He was said, "You can go as correspondent wherever you want." I mean, as a correspondent of Polish press agency. But then, at that time already, he rejected. So I don't know if I answered something.
Did you have your hand up? Yes. I know you are at the back. I haven't forgotten you.
It's moving from film to theatre. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
When the British theatre production of The Emperor went to Poland, did the inexactitude of the facts cause the right wing to condemn any aspect of it? How was it? How did Polish audiences respond to the British production of The Emperor?
I think that there was. I really don't remember the reaction. I'm sorry to say. I think only Kapuściński's followers, admirers, knew that the emperor was on theater stages. So I really don't remember any discussion about it.
Would it ever have been produced as theater in Poland
without
being a British production coming there?
Yeah, there was in late 1970s there was one great theater in Warsaw that put some adaptation of the Emperor on the stage, and immediately, equally as the text of the Emperor, it was received as an allegory of the system. And even there is I talked to some top party officials when I was working on the book, and they were describing the situation in the theater when the people reacted with loud laugh about some dialogues, and they started to laugh too. And then one of them told me, I started to ask myself, what am I laughing at? I'm laughing at myself, because he was one of the top officials of the Communist Party. And also Gerek, who's supposed to be we are not sure to what extent the main character is Haile Selassie and to what extent is Gerek, the first secretary of the Communist Party at that time. But Gerek himself probably didn't read the book, and he just let it go. I mean, it also shows when sometimes I don't know. I suppose that it is not time for Poland right now. I mean, for any special interest. But I'm sure that there were some time when the communists collapsed that there were a lot of information about what happened there. So I think that you have to have in mind that Poland under communism was not like I don't know how to say, barrack in the concentration camp. Like sometimes right wing paints the system. The system has passed evolution. So there were very dark years in the beginning of 1950s, but under Gierek in 1970s, Andrzej Wajda was producing wonderful movies like the one you mentioned, this without anesthesiology. Kapuściński wrote The Emperor. Krzysztof Kieślowski produced also wonderful movies that were very critical about the Polish reality, but in a very intelligent way. I mean, there was no direct critique of the system, but the reality has been shown. That you saw it, the criticism, and I think to some extent the dictatorship had a good job for Polish art. I mean, for writers and movie directors, because I think we don't have such great movies today like we had in 1970s. No, not at all.
Okay, are there any more hands apart from the one I know? We're almost at the end of our time. So do you want to make another? Oh, is there another one? And then the lady at the back. Yeah, please.
Hello. I was just wondering if you could see a change within his work after the fall of the wall. Was it like...
I didn't hear well.
Sorry, we didn't hear.
Sorry. I was just wondering if you could see a change in his work after the fall of the wall.
The fall of the wall.
Change
After the war. Did his work change?
After 89. Well, not really. I mean, this. I don't see any. I think that he became already a writer before the collapse of the communism. And he wrote *Emperor and the Shah of Shah*, that's a wonderful work of literature. And then after the collapse of communism, he wrote 3 main books. There were more, but 3. The Empire, it's about the Soviet Union and collapse of Soviet Union. *In the Shadow of the Sun*, the favorite book of John Ryle. And *Travels with Herodotus*. I think somehow his style has passed some evolution, but I don't see significant changes. I mean,
Thank you. Please.
Well, once again, you asked about the reception and of Kapuściński's work in Poland. I'm not sure if I'm kind of generationally placed well enough to talk about the reception of Kapuściński's work when it was published originally, because I read his work already when he was an established writer and a kind of big celebrity. So it's a bit too late to talk about the original reception. But I think an important thing for this event as well is just sort of a conclusion that in many ways he is a universal writer for everyone who is struggling struggling for independence, and just to tell a certain story, universal story about trying to get some rights that people are denied. And from the Polish perspective, it was said many times throughout this event. From the Polish perspective, it was very important to read accounts from other countries, which were parabolic accounts of what we had in Poland, right? Because we had no other ways to represent the reality that we were trying to protest against. And I can understand right now we are very happy and westernized and trying to help our Belarusian friends, for example, at this particular moment, right? It would be good to have Kapuścińskis, in other countries, in other contexts, just to give the framework, the basic framework of telling some kind of freedom tale. And I think whether he used too much of fiction or not, and there may be a matter of discussion in it, it's always worth to remember that he provided this basic framework for expressing some needs that were very important at that particular time in a particular country, and were read in a bit different time than we're talking about it right now, when all of us are happy and free, right?
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask John to reply a bit to that. Was he a universal kind of writer, and should we have more of them? And just to generally wrap up the evening's preoccupations, and thank everybody for participating. John.
I'm wrapping up the evening's preoccupations. Well, I mean, I don't want to continue to be a naysayer. I think if we could just have a subtitle for the Emperor, like an allegory or a fable or a story about Poland, then we could all agree that it's a very remarkable and original work of literature, because he really did invent a new kind of comic opera genre in that book. But I think if you're interested in Ethiopia, and of course many Ethiopians are interested in Ethiopia, and there are actually more Ethiopians than Poles when it comes to it, it's really a bit worrying. And I think that universality or universalism would have to involve the subjects of the work, which is presented as factual, having some response to it, and with some notable exceptions, I think, but both Day of Life, the Emperor, and the Ebony, as I believe it's called in Polish.
Ebony.
Yeah, which is, I think, gives you an indication that the book may not be quite what you're expecting. This book which was supposed to be the great sort of summum of Kapuściński's African work, seems to me really a very dodgy book. Not for the reasons that we've discussed, which is this elasticity with the facts, which if you redefine the genre, you may excuse, but because actually its whole representation of African realities is what should we say? I mean, I don't want to use kind of abusive words. Many of you probably read an essay in Granta by Binyavanga Wainaina called How to Write About Africa. Did anybody read that book?
Yes.
Yeah. Binyavanga Wainaina actually says that the main inspiration for that essay was Kapuściński's work. And he does actually pull out his favorite phrases. He says, since he died, Kapuściński has been called the master of modern journalism, the translator of the world, the greatest reporter in the world, third world chronicler. Then, says Binyavanga, he's also the guy who came up with my all-time classic lines about Africa. 1. Let us remember, fear of revenge is deeply rooted in the African mentality. Good. In Africa, drivers avoid traveling by night. Darkness unnerves them. They flatly refuse to drive after sunset. Africans eat only once in the day, in the evening. In Africa, the notion of abstract evil does not exist. Africans believe that a mysterious energy circulates through the world. In Africa, a cousin on your mother's side is more important than a husband. Some of these things may be true, some people in some parts of Africa sometimes. But I think that it's very important not to allow our admiration of Kapuściński's style, which was, really arresting style, which drew you in, and these brilliant vignettes that Artur has drawn attention to, plastic jerry cans, the bush taxi, the dogs, all these things are incredibly vivid images which everybody remembers. And if you're a journalist, you envy them, because he really got his finger on it. But I don't think that we should take that as a kind of authority about the things that he wrote about. And I think that you would find that it's kind of striking that in this great sort of chorus of accolades, we saw both when Kapuściński first sort of manifested himself in the Western literary canon, there weren't many reviews, with honourable exceptions, by Africanists of African books, or Africans of African books, or even actually Brazilians and Hondurans about the South American books. Because I think that if you're the subject of one of these books, you have a very different attitude. There are three audiences, aren't there? There's the audience of people who want to be sort of lured and charmed and romanced by these places. There are people who respond to the vividness and the empathy and the fact he was there, and that's, broadly speaking, us. There's the Polish audience, which has, as we've discovered, there's a very, very special local interest in his life and his reputation and the way he said things about Poland, which is extremely interesting and one of the most interesting things about your book. And then there is the audience of the people he wrote about, which is a different matter, and I think to some extent in which we haven't actually heard from that audience yet. That's the thought I'd like to leave you with.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank very much everybody who spoke. Arthur, for being so patient and answering so many questions very fully. John, for his, as always, erudite interventions, and especially to Antonia for her heroic 4 a.m. appearance. So thank you, everybody, very much for coming.
I'm sure that's